weave together our institutions of state and the institutions of state in the United States to resolve an outstanding matter, particularly where it concerns the First Amendment of the United States, which covers free speech. And that effect of free speech is also felt in Australia. We like to be able to make our decisions founded upon knowledge, not just rumour and not in the bliss of ignorance, but founded upon knowledge. Well, equally, the American Constitution, in its finest part, has the Bill of Rights, and the first of those, the most important thereby, is the free speech legislation. All things fall under that. All things are embraced by that. You can't possibly call yourself a civilization if you act outside of the Constitution, which embraces your nation. It's just not possible. And the other comments that were earlier made, that none of the other publishers, and they are the height of legacy media, none of the other publishers have been arraigned, indicted, smeared, cajoled, called liar. None of them. None whatsoever. And that the case Julian has. And they equally published the material that is at the foundation of these espionage charges and accusations.
So, John, how do you feel about this compromise that Julian has had to make to plead guilty to an espionage charge in order to get this outcome that you've dreamed of for so long?
Well, I divide it into two. One is the human factor, that you only get a bit of time here on the earth to spend with your loved ones. That's all you get. So the construction, or if you like, the exposition and understanding of that is encapsulated in the decision to make freedom available to Julian under certain circumstances is vital. You can't live here without time on this earth, and spending time with your loved ones is really important. The other section is, as I have previously expounded upon, state-to-state relationships, how states can work together and do work together, particularly when the United States is immensely powerful, a superpower in economy and military. And Australia relatively is small and weak relatively to that gigantic superpower.
John, I wanted to jump in and ask you about. I wanted to jump in and ask you about the ongoing legal issues in the UK, because you were in the courtroom in February in London, and you saw when Julian was seeking leave to appeal to the High Court, and eventually he was granted leave, and it looked like for once the US lawyers were on the back foot. That was coming down the line for the US. Do you think the fact that the US lawyers were suddenly on the back foot in his case in London may have had an influence ultimately on a deal being struck?
Yeah, that's a pretty good question. I can answer it. Look, the last two court cases, the judges and the court itself, the demeanour towards Julian and the lawyers changed completely. And I take it that was under the influence of a relationship between Australia and the United Kingdom and the US. As you say, the prosecuting barrister for the United States, he had nothing. He came to court without anything to argue. He just threw sand up in the air and said, Section 363, paragraph 20, blah, blah, all meaningless. And so I take it that his instructions were to, he was given no comprehensive instructions to put up a serious fight. So also the two judges for the first time, delivered themselves for the first time in all of those hearings. I can't, I think 20 odd hearings. In all of those hearings, for the first time, the judges allocated to the United States a decision whereby there could be argument made in the appeal hearing. This was really important understanding. They gave room in their decision for argument.
John, the support of Julian Assange by those close to him and others has been unwavering. How important has that been over such a long ordeal? It's the essence. The Australian people, I'm so proud of them. It is the first time we can walk out and look in the sun and say to ourselves, we did a sovereign act, us. And this government, the flow of feeling from us, the people, into the government was manifest that the government solved the problem that we felt existed. I think it's pretty magnificent. John Shipton, thank you so much for joining us this morning.
Thank you for your time. That's very sweet of you.
Such a big day, and I mean, such a profound day for their family, obviously, Steve. You picked up there on the legal situation that was ongoing until we had this news yesterday. Tell us what you had thought about that.
Well, as I put it to John, the lawyers for the US did appear to be on the back foot in that hearing, and Julian was seeking leave to appeal to the High Court, and that was eventually granted. And the discussions that were going to be had at the next level when the High Court sat were around whether the death penalty would apply if Julian was extradited to the US, whether he would be given First Amendment protections, in other words, the freedom of speech element of the Constitution in the US, and also whether he would be discriminated against as an Australian citizen before the US courts. And when that decision was handed down, Julian Assange's barristers hugged in the court. And so you could tell that they saw the gravity of that situation, that it was a very big win for him. And John mentioned there that he believed there'd maybe been 20 hearings. I don't know what the exact figure was over the years, but there were so many hearings that Julian Assange was facing. And his lawyers were wanting to do that because they wanted to appeal all these decisions, particularly after the then UK Home Secretary Priti Patel granted extradition. So in this instance, you got the sense that suddenly the US case was not as watertight as they may have thought it was, and that perhaps, this is speculation because there's so many elements in this decision, I think, that perhaps that had an influence as well, ultimately, on the DOJ decision. But I would say that I think that they were already considering some kind of plea deal before that.
Steve Canone, it's been great to have you here. We know you've been close to this case as your work as a correspondent, and also securing that key interview with Anthony Albanese on this just over a year ago. So it's been great to have your expertise here.
Thanks, Gemma.
Thank you. Julian Assange's court hearing has begun on the island of Saipan, where he is expected to plead guilty in a deal with the US. He will then be sentenced to 5 years in jail for publishing classified documents in 2010. But given the time that he's already spent in a UK prison, he will walk free and then fly back to Australia. The host of RN Breakfast, Patricia Karvelis, joins us now. PK, this is a momentous day for Julian Assange. You've spoken to many of the stakeholders this morning.
I certainly have. It is a momentous day for Julian Assange, but of course, more broadly, I think, for issues around press freedom, for the advocacy for an Australian citizen that our own government has really, since the election of the Albanese government, really invested in at the highest levels, and it's been intense. The fact, I think, that we've even seen this morning Kevin Rudd travelling with him, also Stephen Smith. These are really senior people deployed by our government to travel with Julian Assange to go to this court hearing. And so it is a momentous day, and it's been a 14-year standoff, right? This is this is a sort of period of time that is unfathomable. The fact that he's even in good enough health. I mean, I was speaking to people who were concerned about his health really till very much this story broke. And yet we've seen, I'm not saying that he doesn't have any health issues still, undoubtedly he will, and there will be ongoing issues. But the fact that he was being able to board this plane, come to Saipan and then make his way on to Australia, it is a really big deal. And a couple of points on this. One of the significant things I think is, and it is a moment for us in terms of a national, I don't mean to be too parochial, but I'm going to have a moment where we do expect our governments to be advocates for us, right? And that is the source of national pride for us, that our government does advocate for us as citizens. And on that level, I think this is really significant that our government has done the work to advocate for Julian Assange's release as all citizens. I mean, it's not just about this one individual man. We expect that of our government. It's one of the things we're very proud of our democracy, and democracies around the world are proud of. This has been a long-running campaign, and so it didn't just happen on its own. In the previous parliament, we didn't see the same support from Scott Morrison, the previous Prime Minister for Julian Assange. We have seen a significant shift, and I think that shift has been quite significant in delivering the outcome we're seeing. And it really brings to an end what has been a difficult issue between Australia and the US. Now, I still think it's been a difficult issue, although on the record, I put this to Richard Marles, the Deputy Prime Minister and Defence Minister, this morning on my program, and he said, no, it's been fine, this issue, it's just such a strong relationship. Now, he's right, the US-Australia alliance is extremely strong, and it was certainly not going to be upended by this issue, but it was a difficulty in so much as our Prime Minister had to constantly raise it. He took it to the highest levels, even in his talks with Joe Biden, the US President, and so getting an outcome there does matter. Now, you asked who I've been speaking to. I spoke to Kathy Lepp, for instance. She, her former husband, of course, was instrumental in kind of keeping him in their attic, as she told me. Jeffrey Robinson and her kept him and looked after him as he was getting legal advice. She talked about what a complex character he is. She said herself that he is really divisive in the community. But even though he's divisive and there's ongoing debates about all of that, I think there has been a sense of broad unity in our country that this needed to be closed and brought to an end, and it has been closed well before the US election as well. So a really significant moment. The reason people are still being cautious, though, is until it's settled, until he's on Australian soil, and he's expected to fly to Canberra later tonight. Until that happens, we, of course, will be cautious about, declaring it all over.
Yeah, and just to explain to our viewers, we had that live shot earlier. It has been shut off for the moment, but as soon as we get that again, we'll bring that to you and any developments there, of course. Now, PK, you said, of course, this is a big deal. Tell us about the deal itself and the compromise that's had to be made here.
It's a good point you make. There is a compromise. He has to plead guilty to one count in the Espionage Act. And so he hasn't been pardoned. He does carry that. There is a sort of sentence that goes with that. The deal, though, is still favourable, although not ideal, his supporters say. No one who's been an advocate of Julian Assange says this is exactly what they wanted. That's why it is a deal.
And actually, PK, if we can break in, the breaking news
excellent.
Here now is that he has pleaded guilty to one criminal charge in the US District Court. That's at Saipan. So it is a conspiracy to obtain